So for those of you who are new here, hi, my name is Brittany. I'm an American with dual citizenship in the UK, and for the past 3 years I've been living in London. But we recently moved back to the US, and now I'm originally from California, but when we decided that we were going to leave the UK and move back to the US, we already knew 100% we weren't going back to California. So that meant that we had to go through the entire process of figuring out which state we actually wanted to live in, which is honestly a much bigger decision than a lot of people realize. That's actually what inspired today's video. If you're an American and you're thinking about leaving the state that you're currently in and moving to another state, or of course, a non-American hoping to move to the US and you're not really sure where, I hope this video helps you understand how everything kind of works, because the US is actually pretty similar to the European Union in some ways. There are federal laws and federal taxes that apply across the whole country, but then each state also has its own laws, taxes, regulations, and even its own vibe and culture. Even neighboring states can feel completely different from one another. So when we knew that we were moving back, we had to consider a lot of different factors when deciding where we actually wanted to live. So today I'm going to walk you through all of the things that we kind of thought about. So if you are making a similar decision, hopefully this will help you too. The first thing you want to think about is taxes. Taxes in the US can get a little bit confusing because there are multiple different types. Everyone in the United States has to pay federal income tax. It just goes to the national government. It is what it is. But depending on the state that you live in, you may also have to pay a state income tax, property tax, and sales tax. Not every state has all three, and that's actually one of the reasons why some people choose one state or another. One of the biggest taxes people look at is state income tax, because this directly affects your paycheck, of course. There are actually 9 states in the US that have no state income tax. So this means that more of your paycheck actually stays in your pocket. Those states are Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Nevada, Washington, Wyoming, South Dakota, Alaska, and New Hampshire. Although New Hampshire only taxes certain types of investment income and not wages. So living in one of these states can make a noticeable difference depending on your income level, because you simply get to keep more of what you earn. Another tax that impacts everyday life is sales tax, which is the tax that is added when you buy most things, which Europeans are not going to be used to at all. But most states here do have a sales tax, but there are a few that don't. Oregon, Montana, Delaware, and New Hampshire have no statewide sales tax, and Alaska technically doesn't either, although some local areas add small taxes. This can be a pretty big difference, especially for large purchases like buying a car, appliances, or furniture. For example, if you buy a $40,000 car in a state with 8% sales tax, you're paying an additional $3,200 just in tax, so it saves you a lot. Then there's property tax, which mainly affects homeowners, of course. Property taxes vary dramatically across the country. Some states have extremely high property taxes, while others are much lower. States like Hawaii, Alabama, Colorado, Nevada, and South Carolina tend to have lower property taxes overall, while states like New Jersey, Illinois, and Texas are known for having some of the highest property taxes in the whole country. So even if a house looks inexpensive at a first glance, the yearly property tax bill might be significantly higher than you expected. So you got to look at those things. But the key takeaway here is that you will always pay federal income tax no matter where you live in the US, but being strategic about state income tax, sales tax, and property tax really can help stretch your money a lot further. The next thing to think about is the cost of living, and I specifically say cost of living, not just cost, because a dollar amount itself, it doesn't mean anything. Salaries can look very different depending on where you live. States like California or New York, specifically New York City, typically have higher salaries compared to other states, but the cost of living there is also significantly higher. Housing, groceries, gas, childcare, and utilities can all dramatically be more expensive in those areas. So someone earning, let's say, $120,000 in California might actually have less money left at the end of the month than someone who's earning $75,000 in another state where the cost of living is lower and you don't have state income tax. So this is something we run into all the time when talking to family and friends back in California about moving. When we tell people what salaries look like in other states, their first reaction is usually like, oh, that's so low. But when you factor in cheaper housing, lower taxes, lower gas prices, and generally just lower day-to-day expenses, you might actually end up saving more money each month. So when you are comparing states, it's really important not to just look at a salary, just the dollar amount numbers. Instead, you want to compare the full financial picture. Look at the average rent or mortgage costs, average home prices, gas prices, grocery costs, utilities, and state taxes. When you compare cost of living relative, that's the key word, to salary, that's when you start to see what your actual lifestyle might look like. And then another really important factor factor is the weather. The US is a huge country and the climate varies a lot depending on where you live. So you really have to think about what type of weather you actually enjoy. The Pacific Northwest, which includes states like Washington and Oregon, they're known for being very rainy, very cloudy much of the year. Cities like Seattle and Portland get a lot of overcast days, especially during the winter months. Some people love that cozy atmosphere, while others find it really difficult if they're used to more sunshine, aka me. If you look at the Northeast states or states along the Canadian border, winters can be brutally cold. Places like New York, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Wisconsin have way below freezing temperatures and heavy snowstorms in the winter, but those areas also have beautiful fall seasons with colorful leaves and warm summers. In the South, you have hot and humid weather. States like Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas can have very hot summers, and the humidity can make it feel even more intense. But the winters are usually warm too, so you never really have to experience a winter or anything even remotely cold if you don't like cold weather. Then you have the Southwest, places like Arizona and Nevada, which have a desert climate. So summers there can also be extremely hot, but the air is really dry and there's much less humidity. So it just depends what you like better. And then of course, California has a wide range of climates depending on the region, but overall it's known for mild temperatures and plenty of sunshine. So when thinking about where to move, you really want to ask yourself, what type of weather do you enjoy? Do you want to experience all 4 seasons? Do you prefer sunshine year-round? Do you like dry heat or humid weather? These are really important questions because the climate will affect your daily life more than you might expect. And another major factor to consider, especially if you have kids or plan to have kids, is the public school system. In the United States, public schools are largely funded through local property taxes, which means the quality of schools can vary a lot depending on the area. Even within the same city, some school districts might be excellent while others might struggle. And because of this, it's super important to research school districts before you actually decide to live, predominantly buying, but still even renting. One helpful resource for this is a website called Niche, where you can look up specific schools and entire school districts. You can see rankings, reviews from parents and students, test scores, and a lot of helpful information. And again, if you have kids, this is so important. My husband's cousin moved from California to Illinois to this adorable, very safe, small town. Because most of the town was zoned for a highly ranked school district, she just kind of assumed that whatever house she bought within that town would be fine. But after she bought the house, she did discover that she ended up in one of the tiny pockets in that town that was ranked for a very poorly ranked school district. So now she kind of feels stuck. So this is definitely something you want to keep in mind whether you're renting or buying a home. And again, think about it. If you automatically knock off a place on your list specifically because it had high property tax, I understand. But like I mentioned before, property tax typically pays for the public schools in the area. So it might be worth paying a little bit more in property tax to get really good schools. It's not a guarantee, of course, but it is just something for you to look into and not automatically just rule it out because it's a high property tax, since your kids' education should definitely be a top priority. Another thing to look at, which is much more specific to the city or the neighborhood rather than the entire state, is safety. Crime rates, of course, can vary dramatically depending on the area. Even within the same city, some neighborhoods might feel extremely safe while others might have a little bit higher crime rates. It's always a good idea to just look up crime statistics and get a sense of what the community is like so you can feel comfortable and safe wherever you live. Next, think about what there actually is to do in the place that you're moving to. This might sound so obvious, but it really can impact how much you enjoy living somewhere. Ask yourself, what kind of activities do I enjoy? Do I love being outdoors? Do I like hiking, skiing, spending time in nature? Maybe you prefer living near the beach or maybe the mountains. Maybe you're more of a city person who just loves restaurants, concerts, kind of nightlife, being in the middle of everything. Sports can also be a big factor for some people. If you enjoy going to professional or college sports games, you might want to live somewhere with those teams nearby so you can always go to the games. And if you have kids, you might want to look for places with lots of family-friendly activities like parks, museums, and community events. At the end of the day, everyone wants to enjoy where they live, right? And if you constantly feel bored or like there's nothing to do, then you might just find yourself wanting to move again. Closely connected to this point is the culture of the place that you're moving to. Different regions of the US can have very different lifestyles. For example, if you're a very outdoorsy person, living somewhere like Denver, Colorado or Boise, Idaho might be amazing for you because those places are just surrounded by nature, and many of the people who live there also enjoy those kind of outdoor activities, so it can be a lot easier to meet people with similar interests. On the other hand, if you're someone who thrives in a big city environment but maybe can't quite afford the price tag of New York City, you might want to look somewhere in Chicago instead. Looking at the overall culture of a place can help you find a community where you feel like you fit in and where you're more likely to meet like-minded people. The last factor to consider is politics. Personally, I don't think politics should be the main reason you choose where to live, but it can be something for you to think about if you have very strong political opinions. Different states tend to lean more liberal or more conservative, but it's important to remember that individual cities and communities can be very different from the overall political leaning of the state. For example, if you are super liberal but you really love the lifestyle and weather of the South, you can usually find that big cities feel very different politically than the surrounding areas. Places like New Orleans, Louisiana, or Nashville in Tennessee can sometimes offer a balance where you enjoy the lifestyle of the region while still feeling comfortable with the culture of the city that you're in. So those are some of the biggest things that we considered when deciding where to move within the United States. Taxes, cost of living, weather, public school systems, safety, things to do, culture, and politics can all play a role in choosing the right place to live. Hopefully this video helps if you're thinking about moving to another state or even moving from another country to the US in general. And if you are curious about where we actually decided to move in the US, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because in next week's video I will be revealing what state we decided to move to and why we picked it. Now let's take a look at why we ultimately decided to leave the UK after living there for 3 years and move back to the States.